Welcome to the Music Education Podcast. I'm Chris of the Chris Woods Groove Orchestra, and this podcast is brought to you by the Soundstorm Music Education Hub. In this episode, I chat with Mark Davyd, the CEO of the Music Venue Trust. We're talking about live music and the state of that in the UK currently, the challenges it faces, the strengths, the weaknesses, because this is seriously relevant stuff to all of us as music educators, because ultimately we're talking about where music lives in modern society. It's a sincerely important conversation. I know you'll enjoy listening. Wow, how interesting. So how did you jump from that to this then?
Before that, I started one of these venues in Tunbridge Wells in 1993 with a group of friends, and I always have had that, and I still have it. I'm one of the owners down there, although there is now a community interest company that runs the actual activities and is in charge down there, but we own the building. And around about 2008, we started noticing that a lot of people like us were closing down and not being replaced.
Okay.
And eventually decided in 2014 that it would need an independent representative body. And it could have been an awful lot of people that did it, because there was a lot of people in a similar situation to us. But I was the one who had done, by that time, 16 years of work in charities and understood charity governance and those kind of things.
What's the venue in Tunbridge Wells, isn't it?
It's Tunbridge Wells Forum.
Okay, oh, wowzers.
Just about everybody's played there.
Yeah, cool.
It's Oasis have played there, and Green Day and Adele and Ed Sheeran, and it's a classic. It's a classic type of venue. It's type rural, fairly rural location, 250 capacity. Bands come through; they're on their way up.
That's the biggie, the 250 capacity, isn't it? That's that sort of size. It's like a doable size, sort of.
Yeah, it's 200 to 300 is where a huge clump of these venues have their capacity range, and doing an awful lot of stuff. So. Touring circuits, though, that's a whole discussion in itself.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's so much to talk about, and from my own experiences of working as a musician, but also as many musicians working as a promoter or an organizer and sort of switching around, or and having my own experiences and hearing other people's stories, and immediately you noticing in 2008 things starting to sort of go downhill, which actually is probably when I actually sort of started out there. So I'm quite intrigued by, obviously that's financial crisis time, isn't it? What do you think sort of changed stuff in 2008 then? Because I've got a million and one things in my head that I want to say, I reckon it's because of this and because of that, but you're saying this is while I was still in the womb. Metaphorical 2000
womb. In the early 2000s, the structural changes to the music industry began to change the model of what support was out there for touring artists. And we saw around 2004, 2005, a real collapse in the availability of touring support, partly driven by major labels hemming in on the number of artists they were signing, allowing more work to be done before they were investing any money, and actually cutting their own touring support budgets. That had a long tail impact on the ability of artists to tour, and created an additional expectation that the venues would try and pay for that.
You're talking about signed artists, right, to major labels?
Yes, signed artists.
Okay.
Yeah. Then, which is a long economic spin through these things, but you had that happening, and what you have to understand is those are the big ticket items for a venue. Mm-hmm. So even in 2004, those tours would probably have been £9 or £10 a ticket. The other shows they have on as a music venue are effectively subsidised by the 250 people that fill the room for that show, paying £9 or £10 a ticket. So your classic Tuesday night 3 local bands all starting on their journey either towards a career or just having some fun, that type of show actually probably loses money, and certainly loses money on just the live side. You can't really raise enough money to pay the artists, pay the costs of the staff, pay the cost of the building. And you were starting to try and balance up that. When I started in this industry 40 years ago, I promoted my first show. I hired a hall, hired a PA, hired all the staff. I didn't have the bar. I put on 3 punk bands. It was £3.50 to get in, and I made money. Nobody can do that anymore. You just simply cannot make money.
But what was the difference to that situation? That, that you made some money?
Costs of everything. From the venue hire itself through rent, rates, security, staffing, door costs, PA hire, everything has exploded in costs. And that has got much, much worse since 2008. Those costs, especially post-COVID, have literally exploded. 400% increase in energy costs is the average, 400%. 37% increase in rent in 2023 alone. Staffing costs up by 22% last year.
So literally inflation since 2008, stuff is just getting more expensive, and
and then the ability to charge the appropriate amount of money to that to pick up those costs is a kind of it's an attitudinal, cultural question. How much will somebody pay to go and see 3 bands they've never heard before on a Wednesday night in a local venue? I know the prices at the top of the industry have obviously gone completely another way, where pricing is absolutely... That Black Sabbath show, I think, £250 for general admission standing.
Right.
Now, it'll be a hell of a show, don't get me wrong, but obviously that's radically different from 1983. It was £3.50 to get in and see New Order at the 100 Club. The same night, it was £7 to get into Reading Festival. So it used to be double the price, and now it is literally 20 times the price.
And interestingly, that's far more proportionate, isn't it? Because I can't think how much Glastonbury tickets are now. Are they like 300 quid about?
363, I think they were this year.
So 360 for basically a week of amazingness, but then we're talking 250 to go and see one act who is, pyramid stage sort of legendary.
Yeah, I mean, and there's lots of different weird things about the pricing, but the main thing is the pricing at the grassroots level was pushed as high as it would go. There's 2 elements to it. One is, what is the basic price that somebody will pay to see, your local band acts, and is that financially viable to make that work? And then there's the thing of, how much can you push up the ticket price on the touring acts that everybody wants to get into because they look like they're going to break? You want to be there in the room when it happens, to quote Hamilton. So the first one really hasn't changed. In fact, 1/3 of all the events that took place in grassroots music venues in 2024 were free entry, because you need to try and persuade people to come in and take a risk on seeing new acts in a way that you don't if a casual attendance at a pub. The touring stuff has finally edged towards £15, but that is a long, long way to get there. And then because of these things, they're like a big ring of dominoes all falling on each other. At the same time as the venues costs were going through the sky, so did the accommodation costs, so have van hire costs, so have staffing costs for artists on tour. So the artist needs more money than ever from the ticket. And the venue needs more money than ever from the ticket. And then finally, drop on the end of that, I did tell you it was a long explanation. On the end of that, you drop in attitudinal changes, which is that we have, for the last 15 years now, the model has become that the venue will be losing money putting on live music, and the amount of money that's losing is going up and up and up. And at the same time, it has become relied upon that you will make that back by selling alcohol or food, mainly alcohol. And we are now looking at, and we knew this from 2018 when we first started seeing the studies, We are looking at a generational change in the consumption of alcohol, where the spend per head on alcohol is going down and down and down. So there simply isn't the money within the overall ecosystem for it to function in the way that it did. And that means there are less bands on tour. So you have less high ticket shows. You have shows where there are less likely to be people in the building because you are trying to break something entirely new. Long term, you have the problem that actually these bands do have to build up audiences and careers. It still is, there's not a lot of evidence that demonstrates that a big viral hit will cause you to sell live tickets. It might make you money in another way, but there's a disconnect there. So it's a struggle.
Yeah, it's really interesting you're getting into the alcohol bit, because I don't want to ask a seemingly sort of baiting question, but I wonder how much of this change is solely negative, because my experience of performing is in the UK in particular, and I think this is another aspect of conversation anyway, the cultural differences of performance in the UK and then across Europe. So often in alcohol-dominated venues is essentially quite negative experiences for an artist who is sustainable but not known. 50-seater venue, comfortable, everyone's happy. But when that's an alcohol-dominated venue, it can be quite a negative experience. Whereas when it's performing in more art centre-based places, or things like so-far sounds, where it's, for those people who don't know, where people don't know who they're coming to see, for starters, and it's people can bring alcohol, but they bring their own, and ultimately it's very much, I would suggest, aimed at that sort of younger people anyway, and it can, it's 200 people to a show is sort of an average thing, and that seems to me, that's always like, that's a positive change, because it seems to be sort of more about the music rather than just down in pints and jumping around, which I've got nothing against and fully encourage, but do you know what I mean? It's like, is that, and are quite a lot of these, is the sort of the Dublin Castle just like that model of, like you say, 3 or 5 bands, because that seems to be a thing as well, doesn't it? Squeeze them on, come on, everyone's got to bring 10 people, and then we'll have 50 people here. Is that just a time that's gone? Do you know what I mean? And it needs to be left behind. Don't shout at me.
No, I'm not going to. I think every element of all these different models have a part to play. But I think that imagining that we will do things in a radically different way than the way that we've done them for the last 70 years, since pretty much 1955 is the birth of British rock and roll, which most people don't know about, the Two Eyes Cafe in Soho. And weirdly, the Two Eyes Cafe in Soho and the Cavern Club, the two places you can say where the formula of how we develop British artists and take them out to the world were pretty much established. Neither of those two places had an alcohol license.
Okay. Right.
So there's nothing new in what's being proposed here. However, the costs of it have become extraordinary. And the question is whether you simply leave that model behind, or you try and address those costs, either by bringing them down or finding alternative sources of revenue. And we're trying to do both. And I'm going to say that I think we're doing that quite successfully. We have programs that can help venues to realign themselves as not-for-profit and benefit from tax regimes. Okay. We have programs that are working to reduce energy consumption, and we're looking to, frankly, get involved in energy production to try and manage costs that should be managed. I would like to take a look at artist accommodation, which is one of the biggest costs out there. flippantly, you could say who benefits the most financially from artists touring at this level? Well, it would be, in order, Premier Inn and Travel Lodge, followed by the petrol companies, followed by Ginster's Pasties. And the artists would come in maybe fifth or sixth behind those things. And the venue at this point, professionally run venue with a stage and a PA, is almost certainly losing and contributing to the profits of Premier Inn and Travel Lodge and Shell and Esso. So I think we need to do a radical rethink. But what I would say, this comes up a lot. That's not an unusual thing for somebody to say to me, in terms of picking a model that might be different from what we've done and saying, well, could this be the new model? I think it's really exciting there are new models. But my question would be, for like So Far Sounds, how will So Far Sounds replace the old sawmill or whatever it is in Cornwall? Are they going to take on having places you can go to? There are 810 members of the Music Venues Alliance, providing 5 nights of music a week. The numbers of shows you're looking at replacing literally run to, I think last year was 170,000 shows. So saying, well, that model is dead. Okay, well, I don't think it is. I think there's still massive enthusiasm for it. We're just not able to service it in an economically viable way. And we need to work that out. But when somebody says, well, TikTok will do this, okay, but how's it going to do that? Does music become a thing that you can only experience if you have access to one of these programs? Or is the plan that something like So Far Sounds will expand incredibly rapidly and try and mop up people's access to music? Because a lot of words have been spent about talent development. But ultimately, these spaces are not just about talent development. They are about people's experience of live music, their access to it in their communities, high quality live music presented in a high quality surroundings. It's not, you can't simply replace it by saying, oh, there's this other new thing. That doesn't mean that none of these new things are good. In fact, a lot of them are very good. So Far Sounds, I could tell you that, there's some very good things about it, but there are some interesting challenges in the background of how they're doing it, to do with licensing, royalties. So there's some stuff going on there. It won't be possible to sort those things out. But I think what we should be doing is encouraging those new models, but also supporting what is already there and has already proven to be successful.
And there's always going to be challenges for those new models, isn't there? Because they're coming into, like, the licensing element, I imagine, is a...
Well, specifically, doing a one-off in a space, whether it's designed to be an entertainment space or even if it's in somebody's home, okay, that technically requires a temporary event notice. Yeah, I don't think there are any.
And a PRS license for that specific. Yeah. But that's specific thing. Kind of frustrating, isn't it? Because then you see that surely that becomes a barrier to the progression of live music as well, doesn't it? Because the sort of gatekeepers are going, no, you don't. But the explanation is, well, we're not functioning in the same way. You need to change your systems around it to help it. Well,
I would go the other way. If it can be established that that's what people want in their communities, then what about that we reduce the licensing demands on small venues?
Yeah.
I don't think we're talking about trying to prevent people from doing things. I think we're talking about a level playing field. My big thing would be practically, I don't have to keep saying So Far Sounds, but that's the example you used. But practically, if So Far Sounds wanted to run 5 nights a week in a specific space, which would completely replicate a music venue that might be lost, their licensing, their costs, the staffing, the way that it's done, everything would radically change. And therefore it wouldn't be a new model. It would be the old model under a new mechanism. So, or if that can be changed, that would be the kind of work we're doing, where we're trying to reduce the costs. So we have a team that specifically supports venues with their licensing issues and their opportunities, looking at whether they can be open later, looking at whether they can have a different type of license, all kinds of things like that. But that work is frequently resisted in a way that some of these models aren't.
As in the models of the council
the
or
new
the
models of-
okay.
Yeah. So it's an interesting one. I do agree, though. I do think that the absolute reliance on alcohol as a basically a subsidy for live music, that's what it is. I think that is negative for artists in a way that wasn't considered at the point where it started happening. And I do wonder whether retrospectively artists and managers would have been as keen to try and get more and more of the door money into the hands of the artists, which they kind of had to do, understanding that ultimately that would create an atmosphere where certainly new musicians can struggle to be heard in a room that's full of, as you say, that is dominated by alcohol. So, these are long tail decisions, though, and I don't think people necessarily. I don't think there was a meeting. I don't think we sat down. I don't think anybody sat down in about 1998, 99, when it changed from effectively the whole of the live music is sponsored by the door and the bar is a separate thing. And then agencies particularly started trying to eliminate costs from the cost of the show. So in my first promotion that I did, the hire of the hall was considered to be a cost. By 1998, agencies started asking, can you take the electricity out of it? Can you take the rates out of it? You should be paying for the rent and the rates and the services from the bar. Okay, well, I know why that was done, but it doesn't look great in the end. We've come to a weird point now where live music costs the venue money, and you have to try and make that all back from the sale of alcohol. That's quite a long way from where British rock and roll started. The Beatles only played lunchtimes. How about that?
Oh, that's interesting. That's really well. Talking about sort of booze culture as well, and you saying it was those two venues in '55. Did you say they opened the Cavern and
The Two Eyes Cafe in Soho was where Cliff Richard and Tommy Steele were discovered in 1955, 56.
But they weren't serving alcohol as well. They were cafes. But...
No, it's a basement bar serving coffee.
But this is the drinking culture of the 50s and 60s are just so disparate to like 70s, 80s, 90s, noughties, a little bit different, and then we're now it's a real change, isn't it? It's a real sort of...
Yeah, and that's the kind of work that we do is trying to look at those long-term changes. People ask me, at the moment we're campaigning on this levy on arenas and stadiums, ticket sales, to go into a fund to support grassroots venues, artists and promoters at that page to do their career. We started that campaign in 2018 because at that point we had identified this kind of attitudinal change, which would mean that the subsidy that was coming from alcohol must decrease. I mean, it must decrease. I mean, I think, 36% in the latest, 36% of people 18 to 25 don't drink.
Mad.
So
that's such a contrast, isn't it, to like when you were
it's huge. It's massive. And thinking about that, we realised, well, look, actually, what we need to do is we need to look at an industry that is having a golden era right now. And we can all see that coming down the pipeline in 2018, 2019. They have never made more money. There's never been more people going to live music shows, and there's never been more money being made. But it's all being made absolutely at the top. It's being made in the top 5% of shows. Everything else is really struggling, even down to concert hall level. Mm-hmm. Things that are 1,500, 2,000 capacity, really difficult to make them work economically. Meanwhile, at the top, you've got the first, second, third, fourth, and fifth billion-dollar tours all took place in the last 3 years.
Wow. Okay, that's interesting.
Yeah. So I mean, it's big. It's a big change.
There's to get sort of slightly more philosophical about it, because we're obviously talking about economic ideas and opportunities for artists and for development and stuff. But do you think people really understand what we're losing from a community, even dare I say it, at risk of making half of our listenership run away, but almost the semi sort of spiritual experience of standing next to someone and listening to something and experiencing the same emotion and from the sound that is happening around you. You know, I often feel that people certainly don't talk about that. Even musicians don't talk about that, do we? Or people who love music, because we just do it. That's what we do. But really, that is the real risk of what we're losing, isn't it? Is because like that TikTok thing sure is a musical experience, but it is fundamentally different to being together and musicking.
I'm pleased somebody else said the spiritual experience, because it's the sort of thing that I get emails about if I say it. But it is massively under talked about and undervalued, and it's almost strange. We have so many studies now that are talking about the communal health benefits of being together in spaces and experiencing culture, not just music, but broad ranges of culture.
So even looking at a painting together, like just that sort of together.
And talking about it and experiencing stuff like that, and how important that is. Particularly, we have a mental health crisis in the UK. Mm-hmm. Everybody's talking about it. There are limitless papers about it. There are also, for anybody that's listening, there are so many research papers indicating that one of the best ways you can change that is to make people feel less lonely, make them feel less isolated. And one of the key ways you do that is to have them experience things together, to feel part of something, to feel that the place they live in is representative of them. And when we start talking about all those things, music venues and the experience you have in them sits right in the middle of that possibility to change that. Look at how disconnected we all are by social media. Look at how, people's voting patterns are related to how they feel that the society doesn't represent them, and we're not part of it. And this concept of who owns this town, who owns this city, who does it belong to? These are things, really radical things in society, beyond even your misplaced use of the word spirituality, which will get you in trouble. I'm talking about whole societal things that are super important. Do people feel that this community is their community? Well, they don't if they sit in their house and they're just angry tweeting. They don't if they sit in their house just watching endless videos of people who don't look like them, don't seem like them. It's just very, very disconnected. I know all the good things that social media does. There are very important communities for which it's super important. But we have lost that essential understanding that standing together in a place when the artist that you've all just discovered plays the song that you've been waiting to them to, and then you all sing it together, that is absolutely fundamental to who we are as humans. And we have a temporary blip. We're going through a temporary blip where that's not really being valued for what it has been, in the way that, frankly, we've been banging drums together for probably 40,000 years. There's a reason that we did that. And I think whether it's spiritual, whether it's about mental health, whether it's about your physical health, going dancing is good for you.
Yeah.
Singing is good for you. It's you're breathing in a very special way when you sing. These are actual. We know this, and yet we are still letting vital cultural spaces in our communities close. We are not providing the cultural experiences we could be. We're cutting whole communities. In the last 2 years, doing that number for you now, 150 spaces around the country closed down. And a lot of language and words and really important stuff about the talent pipeline was displayed around that. What a disaster it is. This artist won't get it. What about those 150 communities who don't have a space to gather in anymore? What's happening to them? And I think from our point of view as an organisation, I think that's a much more interesting conversation. What kind of places do we want to live in?
Do you think actually it's kind of people's fault? And because we are it's so easy to Netflix and chill rather than to go out and connect.
There's an element of that. This probably won't make the podcast, but I should tell you a presentation by a platform,
Okay.
explaining to artists how many videos they should be making a day.
Okay.
And what they needed to do to be a success on their platform, by which they mean, how do we make our platform a success?
Yeah.
The first question was, well, if it looks to me like I'm going to be spending 80% of my time making your content for your platform, so am I going to make 80% of my money on there? To which the answer was, no, this is great exposure, which I hope all artists are learning means absolutely nothing. And the second question, and the one that you'll get in trouble for, is, can I have sex on this platform? To which the answer was no. And then somebody said, well, in that case, I'm going to need to go somewhere and actually meet someone. So
that's fantastic.
What are cultural spaces like music venues for? They're for making sure there is a human species in the
Yeah. That's fine. I think that can make the podcast, because actually it's sort of. I feel like often these episodes we're just desperately trying to explain ridiculously simple concepts, but they feel really hard to explain. But that is it. We need to physically connect to actually exist as a species.
To actually exist as a species. So it's. I'm happy to say I took my wife on the first date we had together. We went to the Astoria and saw bands at the Astoria.
Cool.
That's the first date we went on. And my kids go regularly to gigs because they want to meet people and be part of a gang and feel at home in a tribe. And
that's that tribe
I don't think that practical need has been lost. I think it's being submerged beneath a wave of there's this and there's this and there's that and there's that. But I do see, in my kids' generation, I do see increasing numbers of young people leaving their phone in their pocket to experience life. I was at a show in Belfast recently. I saw a band called Panic Over, and they must all be very early 20s at a guess, and their audience is 18 to 23. Room was absolutely packed. And actually, a friend of mine who works in the music industry leaned over and said to me, this room looks really weird and I can't work out why. And about 10 minutes later, leaned over and said, there's no phones.
Right.
They hadn't got their phone out to film the band. They were enjoying the band.
Right.
And I think that's not everything belongs on your social media. And by the way, that's a driver for the fall in the consumption of alcohol. One of the things that young people will tell you is they don't want to be seen on social media drunk.
Right.
Yeah, I think that's what people are starting to realise, and I think that is one of the drivers. Well, we know it's one of the drivers. It comes up in a poll quite regularly.
Right.
Trying to control my social media presence by avoiding putting myself in situations which would be reputationally negative for me. Imagine the mental health pressure that puts people under. They need to go to a gig and leave their phone at home.
That sounds what an awful existence. Really scary stuff. I think because most of the people who listen to this are obviously musicians, but music educators, and I think a lot of music education conversation is based around what young people want, and basically trying to take music education away from being created by older people, as in, this is what music should be, and going to the younger people, what do you think music is? What do you want to learn? And I think when it comes to the realities of where music is living now, I think so many of us don't really know, because it is such a state of flux, isn't it? It really, even this concept of when I was playing in bands or creating music on my own, even, it would be worked on for months and months and months, and then built up to one performance in a pub where 5 other people are playing, and I get to play it to friends, and that will be a really big deal, and that will be the first airing. Whereas if you're 18 and in a band now, here's the first rehearsal, here's a video of what we did. Yeah. And that's just, I don't think that can be sort of underestimated in...
It needs filtering, and I do think that, listen, we're in the infancy stages of these kind of things, and we've forgotten that. How old is TikTok? It's like 7 years old or something.
Right.
Even YouTube is it's like 12 years or something now. And I think we tend to think these are permanent fixtures of the landscape.
But they are,
and lose sight of some of them.
Surely.
Well, I mean, look at Twitter's numbers are so far down that it's meaningless to be on there.
Yeah, but it'll still be put up to be well, I don't think Blue Sky is going to be that, is it? But something else with the same idea exists, isn't it? Is that...
Possibly, but I mean, for an audience of music educators, I will say, look, I something we haven't touched on really. I think the portfolio careers, which you touched on when we were first talking, the portfolio careers that most music educators working outside of the formal music education system that I know, and I know a lot, those portfolio careers are increasingly hard to maintain, and we do need to do something about that, because I think the whole gig economy in the broader economic sense of the word, but for us as people who work in music, you might do sound engineering on one day and you do classes on the next day, and then you've got your solo bit on the third day, and on your fourth day you're in the studio doing a session musician piece, and on the Friday and Saturday you're out playing one night with a tribute band and the other night with a band that you're trying to work up, and that's really, really normal now, and increasingly normal, and I think that successive governments have absolutely failed to recognise that that's absolutely where the most creativity is, and it's where we produce things that we weren't expecting to, and that can be physical bits of IP in terms of new songs, etc., but new ideas, and I think that kind of being involved in so many things is absolutely vital to how those new ideas get formed. That
multidisciplinary polymath idea of
exactly that's where the really interesting stuff happens. That's where I would run into a music educator who suddenly found a way to use video from another project they were doing in order to, all those kind of things happen because of that. But we're now in a tax regime and a physical regime of obstacles to those careers. The changes, a very technical point, the changes to NI in the last budget are disastrous for the gig economy. It's an absolute disaster. But venues have typically employed musicians or people who are doing having those portfolio music careers to do a variety of jobs. Suddenly all those people are now within the scope of NI in a way they weren't before. How do we end up doing that? It's completely the opposite of the direction we want to go in. We want to encourage people to take those kind of creative careers where they build things themselves and develop new ideas. And instead of that, we've got a tax regime now that's basically telling venues, you need to get rid of those people.
So explain that in a little more detail about the national insurance implications.
So basically the thing was, if you were with the IR35, which will be familiar to you, a lot of
good.
that regime of what you can do before you are an employee obviously has been tightened up. And so we have seen statistically a push to taking people on payroll. Very large numbers of people that work in music venues that have these kind of portfolio careers typically earned between £4,000 and £10,000 a year doing that part of their work. Might have been as simple as working on the bar, or it might have been doing the sound engineering or the lights or the stage tech, whatever it was, between £4,000 and £10,000 a year. In the last budget, the government lowered the threshold at which you had to pay national employers' national insurance from £10,000 to £5,000.
Wow.
And at a guess, it has taken something like 30 to 40,000 people working in this sector into national insurance that weren't in there before.
And is that the employer contribution of national insurance rather than the individual?
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
So that's made it invaluable for them to take on Johnny to do the lights, because actually, rather than paying you £15 an hour, it's actually costing me 20.
Correct.
Okay.
And then because of that, wait for it. And this, I don't think governments set out to do these things. I think they just don't understand us at all in some regards. You get the law of unintended consequences. Venues can now benefit from providing less work to more people. So if you are under the 5,000 threshold, if you keep them under the 5,000, it literally promotes bad employment practice. and promotes less skills building. Instead of having £9,999 worth of work in one place, it would benefit both those places to employ you for £4,999, and neither of them has got the national insurance liability.
Right.
How badly designed is that? I mean, but it's typical of the things that governments do that don't understand this method of what we're doing, this kind of creative careers, creative employment, the way that we all act, and it doesn't, I don't know, it just feels very unrecognised and unacknowledged when we design things that will practically impact on people's lives.
Fascinating. Really, taxes should be boring, but it really implicates sort of cultural things, doesn't it? I think like the IR35 thing, man, was fascinating.
Yeah, I know.
And it's obviously
Again,
not what it's meant for, is it? It's not.
No, unintended consequences. Most common thing, and I would say unintended consequences goes across a huge amount of legislation, not just on employment or taxes, but planning, licensing. I don't think. I've been around government a lot in the last 10 years. I don't think any government minister or any MP ever sat down trying to think how they could close music venues, or how they could stop having people having creative careers.
Destroy culture.
But they have done an awful lot of things that have accidentally done that. I don't think they're intentional. I'm going to keep saying that. I don't. If you look at government speeches, not just from the Department of Culture, Media and Sport, but from Treasury, from the Prime Minister. This is a government that's set out to get growth, and I'm sure people are bored of hearing that because I wish they'd think about some other things. But the number one place they want to get growth is in the creative industries. That's top of their list.
Really?
And yet a raft of measures were introduced in the budget in October, November that are moving in exactly the opposite direction. Massive increase to business rates on music venues, £7 million in additional taxes. The national insurance, if the venues stick with their current staffing structures, which they probably will, because, look, these days, more than 1 in 3 of them are registered as not-for-profits. They're literally charities or community interest companies.
And do they then get away from paying business rates and things like that?
They can do, but it's only reduced it down to a £7 million increase across the whole sector in business taxes. The national insurance ones, if they don't do anything about that, it'll be £15 million in additional taxes. So that's just those two measures alone are £22 million in additional taxes on a sector that in the whole of 2024 returned across all 810 venues a total profit of 2.5 million.
Wow.
43% of the venues lost money in 2024.
So what's the future in your opinion then? Do you think it is a shift to community-led things, grassroots things, and where in that confusion of where government is obviously making changes for businesses as a whole, but actually some businesses have more of a benefit to society than others, for example, music venues. Do you think that's the shift?
That's a brilliant leading question. Well done, Chris. I greatly enjoyed it. The answer is we have to treat the whole of the ecosystem from top to bottom in a more coherent way. And that doesn't mean I'm proposing some sort of communist manifesto where
that would have been
the bass player of where the bass player of the Rolling Stones owns the same amount of money as the kid who's just started. That's not what we're saying. Yeah. But the disparity of distribution of income in just about all streams, whether it's recorded, publishing or live, whatever it is, the disparity in what's being earned at the top and what's being invested at the bottom is too wide. And we will have to close that, and we have plans, along with lots of music industry colleagues, of how that is done in live, and that needs to emerge in recording and streaming as well. There needs to be some plugging of this gap because it's become unsustainable at the bottom end of the industry while we're frankly installing gold toilets backstage at Wembley Stadium.
But seriously,
for the top of the industry.
How do you do that, though? Because that is, and you saying it's not a communist manifesto, but surely the sort of capitalist mindset of the guys wanting to make more money, etc., etc. So how on earth do you realistically do it?
Well, in the first case, in the live industry, there's a proposal to take forward the voluntary levy, which is where £1 from every ticket sold at arenas and stadiums will be put into a fund and distributed to support artists at the beginning of their careers, venues that support those artists, promoters that take risks on putting them on.
Kind of like the lottery fund, like to fund arts.
Yeah, that's in theory already in place, although there are some doubts about whether the big companies will take part in that or whether they can.
Okay.
However, the Culture Minister, Chris Bryant, has announced that if that does not work, he will do statutory legislation to make that happen.
Fair play. Good lad, okay.
So that's definitely happening. I don't have all the answers for recording and streaming. You need to interview somebody else. Okay. But I think that model... I mean, let's not pick out a company, but there's a very well-known streaming company that paid over £330 million in bonuses last year, while simultaneously removing the first 999 streams on its platform from any payment whatsoever. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Those two things shouldn't be happening at the same time. Mm-hmm. I have no problem with people paying themselves bonuses if they're doing a good job. I do have a problem if they're doing that at the same time as they're demonetizing musicians' careers, as they won't support the places where people need to build their careers or develop. That thing doesn't work. So there's that. Then on the other side, you've got the government. Look, it's a tough period. Whether you accept all their figures or not, it's quite obvious that the country has fairly severe financial challenges. But the solutions to this won't change. And that is that in this sector, we should be eliminating wherever possible pre-profit taxation and taxation regimes that discourage taking risks, taking creative choices, embarking on creative. If anything we have like that, will eventually have to go. And I mean business rates. I mean VAT on tickets. VAT on tickets in the UK is the highest of any music producing country in the world. It's 4 times what it is in France. It's 3 times what it is in Germany. And it's infinity times what it is in Norway. Because in Norway, the VAT on grassroots music venue tickets is 0%. So when people ask me, well, why do I get treated so well when I go to France? Well, the answer is they have a 3.5% statutory levy on every ticket sold, which goes into a fund to support French artists, French venues and French promoters and support them at the grassroots from the biggest events that they have. And they also have a tax regime that is literally promoting these spaces being open and artists to take risks on going on tour. We need to move towards that because otherwise we're going to get left behind.
Because that is something that I was going to get into earlier, but I sort of missed out, which is the brutally honest and will be hugely unpopular thing to say of my experience of performing is it is exponentially more successful and more pleasurable playing in Europe rather than here. For my level of artist, 100%.
Not contentious. Not contentious at all. There are structural licensing, taxation.
I just think
funding.
Culturally as well. It just seems to be a sort of. There seems to be more sort of risk taking from audiences.
Because you can afford to do that. You can have schemes to get people in to see new artists if the funding's there to enable you to do that. If the costs of running your building, as they are in France, are as near to zero as makes no difference, then of course you're programming things that are taking more risks and you're encouraging audiences to come and take new things. Venues have increased in the UK, are increasingly relying for their live music stuff. The bit that makes money is tribute bands. That's absolutely antithetical to the whole government growth agenda. There's no growth for the UK in relentlessly raking over our past. We need to build IP and the creativity of the future. It shouldn't be a retrogressive process.
Isn't that the people's fault, if you like, rather than Keir Starmer? Because the reality is that most people would rather go and see a Beatles tribute act than they would come and see me play self-indulgent, slightly atonal guitar music. Do you know what I mean?
How? Well, maybe, but how would we know?
Certainly
when
not
the
my
entire...
fault.
Yeah, no. But no, how would we know when the whole legislative and licensing and taxation framework in the UK is basically rewarding the public and the venues and the artists for repeating its past? We do not have a progressive tax or legislative structure that is encouraging risk-taking, that is encouraging people to experience new things. We're saying, listen, for example, even with the music industry, pay £300 to go and see the acts that you already know that are headlining a stadium. That's what you could spend your money on. We're not creating a thing where we say, listen, for that you could experience 20 nights out where you'll find another band that you like. There's nothing that we're not doing anything that encourages that. We're not reinvesting in any way. And we are now unusual. It's us in the United States that aren't looking at these things. And that's where the influence of the multinational companies is the strongest anywhere in the world. But they have, listen, it's a worldwide problem. They have the same problem in Australia. They're working at the same problems in Canada. You need to get the framework right, and then creativity will be supported, and then people will make better informed cultural decisions. And then within a very short time, you'll be selling out your shows and the Beatles tributes ones will be empty. That won't happen.
That's the aim. No, amazing. All right, Mark. Thank you. I appreciate your time, man. Really do.